those tales. Now, let me ask you a question. Are ghosts real? Or are they just a figment of our imagination? Today's story takes place in Ontario, Canada. The year is about 1970. And one person decides to find out exactly, are ghosts real, or are they just made up from our minds? So a Dr. A.R.G. Owens, part of the Toronto Society Psychological Research, or TSPR, decides to put a team together of people to conduct an experiment to see if ghosts are real or they're just imagination of our minds. Part of his team is his wife, Irene. Another one is Dr. Joel Witten, who's actually a psychologist. The next person is Margaret Sparrow, former chairman of Messer. An industrial designer, Andy H., his wife, Lorraine, a heat engineer, Al Peacock, an accountant, Bernice M., a bookkeeper, Dorothy O'Donnell, and a social student named Sydney Kay. Now, Dr. Joel Witten is an observer of this whole thing. So he's going to be observing it. Everybody else is going to be participating in it. So they decide, okay, we need to give our fictitious ghost a name. What are we going to name it? So they all get together and they come up with the name Philip Ashleyford. Now, just having a name wasn't good enough, they felt. They decided, let's make a biography of him. So Philip lived in the 1600 time period. He was an aristocrat of a wealthy family, married to a woman named Dorothea. Dorothea was a very cold and frigid wife to Philip. So they both lived in the family home of Diddington Manor. One day, when Philip was riding his horse on the perimeter, he came across a gypsy encampment and I caught a gypsy girl named Margaret. Had dark eyes and raven black hair. Fell madly in love with her. So, Philip decides to bring Margaret back to Diddington Manor and keep her in the horse carriage house just on the outside of the manor. So nobody knew of their affair. Well, one day his wife caught wind of the affair and declared witchcraft. She used witchcraft on her husband. Now this is a 1600 time period. So that was a, of course we know, no. So there's a trial. Unfortunately, Philip, in fear of losing his credibility and his wealth, did not stick up for Margaret and protest against him. And Margaret was sentenced to be burned alive at the stake. Now, Philip was stricken with guilt over not sticking up for Margaret. And every night he will walk the battlement. Basically, the battlement's like the wall of the manor. Until one morning, they had found Philip at the bottom of it. So basically, he jumped, committed suicide. Okay, now, they have the biography of Philip and his whole backstory of what happened to him. So they go a step further with this now. They decide to have one of the team members who have artistic skills to do a portrait sketch of what Philip might have looked like. So they do. Now, mind you, that whole story, the whole biography of Philip is fictitious, except for one element, Diddington Manor. Diddington is actually a real village in England. It's not a manor, it's a village in the outskirts countryside of England. So that's the only real thing in this whole story. So they do a sketch of Philip, and they're like, okay, we have his story, we have what he potentially looked like. Now it's time to move to the next stage. So the year is 1971. They put pictures of real castles to be on the table. They're using basically a card table. And if you know card tables, they have fold-out legs back then, and the tops are really smooth. So the cards, you can slide them around really easily. So they have that now established. They put real pictures of castles, like I said, for inspirations. They put the sketch of Philip on the table, and they're just like asking different questions and trying different methods, and nothing is working. For a year they do this, okay? Nothing's working. 1972 rolls around, and they decide we need to change tactics. Okay, that we meet about once a week. Okay, at the same location. It was Dr. Owen's house. Now they decide, like I said, to change tactics. Let's try actually seance, the traditional type of seance that we've all heard of. So they get rid of the pictures of the castles, the real castles, and they just keep the picture of Philip on the table. Everybody places their hands on the table. Palms down, fingers spread. Okay? They start calling out. Then all of a sudden, they hear a rap on the table. And at first they're like, okay, who's joking now? Who's playing? Because part of their experiment was also to be very skeptic and debunk anything that comes through. Okay. And their number one goal in this whole experiment too is, could they get it to manifest itself by their imagination. Okay? So everybody denies the rap. They're like, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. So like, okay, let's continue. They call out for Philip again. They get a rap. So now they're wondering, because like I said, everybody's hands are flat on the table with fingers spread apart. And remember, the psychologist is an observant, so he's not part of the seance. So they ask him, is anybody like kicking the table or anything like that? And he says, no. Okay. And they actually did record and videotape all these sessions. And the psychologist is like, I'm not seeing anybody doing anything out of the ordinary. So they go, okay, so they're just getting little raps here and there. So they go, okay, if this is Philip, Ashley Ford, knock once for yes or twice for no. They get a rap. Only one. So now they're like, well, this is interesting. So Dr. Owen decides, you know what, let's change the lighting. Let's play with the mood lighting. Let's see if that changes it, really ramp things up. So he does. Starts playing with the lights, physically. Everybody knows he's physically doing it. Because, the dimmers that you have, that's what he had. So he's sitting there and he'll set the mood, light down. See if it, like I said, heightens the activity a little bit more. So he joins him back at the table. And all of a sudden, the dimmer changes and the lighting changes. And they're like, wait a minute. Is this faulty or something? Dr. Owen goes over, sets it back to where he had. Sits back down. Lighting changes on its own again. So now they're like, okay, let's ask Philip. And they asked Philip, did you change the lighting? One rap. Then they ask, did you not like the lighting that was set? 2 raps. Meaning no, he didn't. Now this is showing intelligence. Now mind you, the character that they developed was from the 1600s, so they didn't have electricity. But it could have been influenced, whatever they created, having the knowledge of electricity, because it coming from more modern people, subconsciously they could have put it into their creation. It's a theory. So now they're getting intelligent responses though. And then they ask Philip, what else can you do? The table slides across the floor. Now, the card table that they're using is on a very thick carpeted floor. And if you all know, if you try to move one of those foldable tables across one of these thick carpeted floors, it doesn't move very easily. It just like bounces around, vibrates everywhere. But this just slides. So now they're thinking, okay, who's moving the table? Somebody's got to be moving the table. And everyone's like, no, it wasn't me. It was not me. So the team, because they all worked together when they were coming up with new ways to either debunk it or make sure there was no contamination of the experiment. So those doilies that you see, the paper ones and the cloth ones you put a drink on or a plate on. They decide, okay, let's get these cloth doilies, and everybody is to put their hands on them. Okay, so now everybody has these doilies. So if you're going to try and slide the table, your hand's just going to slide across it because it's a very smooth surface. So everybody has their hands on doilies now. Table slides again. And mind you, they're asking these questions. What else can you do? The next thing they're like, okay, Philip, what else can you? What is the extent of your powers? Basically. Table rises off the ground. And then table goes back to the ground. And the whole time the psychologist is like, I'm not seeing anybody trying to pick, and you try and pick a table up, sitting down with your hands on the table with just a leg or something without your body leaning back. So he's bewildered himself. It even gets to the point where everybody has to stand up and they keep their hands on the table because you had to keep your hands on the table no matter what during the seance. They made that a rule where the table would stand up on one leg and they had to move with it. So, and you can see their hands, them sliding their hands to reposition so they keep it on there. So that it wasn't like they had sticky stuff on their hands and everybody moved the table. No. Now they're in a conundrum. They're like, did we actually create a being from our minds? It has kinetic, it has the ability to move objects like a poltergeist. It's showing signs of intelligence and communication, and they can't explain it. 100% they cannot explain it. So Dr. Owens presents his research. Now, of course, people are very skeptical of it. And they're like, well, yeah, maybe it was like, because everybody is involved, you're just thinking you're hearing these sounds and you're subconsciously moving the table because you're all so focused on trying to create a being from your mind, your imagination, that you're doing it without realizing it. Even the psychologist, because he's a part of it, could have been, not even realize it. So the doctor goes, okay, we will do a live TV showing of this. So they do. They go on live TV. They set up the same table they used that they have always used, because the legs, like I said, the legs fold up. So they bring the same table. They bring the doilies with them, and they set up right there on live TV and start calling out to Philip. They start getting 1 rap for yes, 2 raps for no. Right there in the TV studio in front of 50 witnesses. So much that the table even levitates a couple inches off the ground and then back down. Now everybody is besides themselves. They're like, no way you just did that. There was a trick you did or something like that. And they're like, we're not doing this. Mind you now, their hands are on doilies. They even show if we try to move this table, we can't because our hands are just going to slide around it. The table slides back and forth. It comes off the ground a couple inches, goes back down. Nobody in that studio could explain it. What transpired whatsoever. So the aftermath of this experiment, with it being so, well, evident that They had created something. Toronto University decided, well, let's do another experiment. But we're going to choose the group. All right, so Toronto University is doing their own now. And they assemble a team. Now, mind you, the first team, and this is how they assembled their team. The first team, Dr. Owen's team, for the Phillips experiment, nobody in the team claimed they had psychic or medium abilities. They were average people. Like I read, a heating engineer, a socialist student, bookkeeper. These were average people. So for the Toronto University, they decided we want the same thing. We don't want anybody who claims they're a medium. We don't want no one who claims they have the capability of speaking with the dead, because that creates a bias automatically. Okay. And you can't really prove if they do or don't have that ability. So they assemble their team. They want them to do the exact same thing as the Phillips experiment. So they come up with a name. Her name is Lilith. Now Lilith, her backstory is she was a French-Canadian spy. And then they do a whole biography on her. They do a portrait of what they think she looks like. They get together, they start conducting these seances in the same manner as a Phillips experiment. Mind you, these are people who weren't involved with it. They get the same results. Wrappings, table shifting around. So, after the Lilith experiment, the university decides, well, we're going to run another test to see if it's just power of suggestion, hearing about the other case. So they decided to run another one. But they made sure these people didn't know anything about the Lilith experiment or the Phillips experiment. So there was no knowledge of those two. And they asked them, average people again, to come up with a name and a background and to sketch a portrait. Now this one, he was a medieval alchemist. Same results. Wrappings, table moving, playing with lights. Now you have 3 cases with the same results. Is that just coincidence? Or did they actually create something from their own minds? But it doesn't end there. University of Australia gets wind of this experiment. So they want to see for themselves, is it real? Or is this some American crazy stuff? So they assemble a team. And they come up with a name and a biography. And her name's Skippy. And they conduct their experiment. Same results. Skippy answered them. Now you have a university clear across the world getting the same results. It's 4 experiments that all worked. I don't call that coincidence. You can, obviously. So, what is the conclusion the outcome. People still to this day say, well, this just proved that ghosts don't exist. It's all in your mind. But is it? Because that actually does not prove that ghosts don't exist. Mind you, remember, with the Philip experiment, the first one, they were getting intelligent responses. So much that 50 people in a live studio saw these things, knew nothing of the experiment. Now, you could say they channeled something from another side. That is a possibility. They did create something that wasn't present. That was their only drawback. Because like I said, their main goal was to get something that they created to manifest itself. It never did do that. In all 4 experiments, it never manifested itself, but it did answer intelligently and was able to manipulate things in its environment. Tables, lights. So you could say, yeah, they kind of did touch the spirit world. Although it was in a different way, they did channel something. Because when you think about it, what they created was part of the spirit world. We can't see that. Only if they want you to. So Philip was limited in his powers. Now, could that have been because of the people that were chosen? There were, like I said, all average people, never claiming to have any sense of paranormal, psychic abilities. So did that put a limitation on all of them? Or is it just because they didn't have it? But the one thing skeptics cannot explain is how all 4 entities were able to communicate and answer in intelligent forms. Now granted, yeah, they were just raps, knockings, because they tried to get EVPs and they were not able to get those, unfortunately. I mean, these skeptics have seen all the footage from all these experiments. Not a single one can explain the events that took place. If it was all in the mind, you and I, if we watch the footage, would never hear the rapping. If it was just all in their minds. We wouldn't see the table move, lights flicker. So in a way, they kind of prove that there is another side. What that other side actually is, we still don't know. Now the funny thing is, with this whole experiment, it actually inspired the movie The Quiet Ones. The movie The Quiet Ones is what this was based all off of. In fact, at the very end of the movie, it gives credit to the Phillips experiment. And if you haven't seen The Quiet Ones, you should see it. It's actually a really good movie. It's well done. It's not the movie about the Phillips experiment, though. So what do you think? Did they create something with their mind? did they actually bring something in from the other side? I'll let you guys decide that. Let me know in the comments what you think. But until then, we'll see you on the next one of Gargoyles Tales. And everyone have a good evening.